Welcome everyone to National Park Service Presents Season 3. That is right, we are at 3. As I was telling my colleagues, this program is in the toddler years of its birth, and it's my favorite thing in the world. Don't tell the other programs. But thank you so much for joining us on this wonderful Wednesday. National Park Series Presents is a completely online series that will run every other Wednesday at 6 p.m. all the way until April, which I believe that is April 26th. The series covers a whole multitude of topics, but today's one focuses on environmental justice, specifically around Beacon Hill. Before we begin on the really awesome things, I am going to go into some of the boring Zoom features. I hope you can still hear me. My video might make me go toot, 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 toot. That's my computer. It is not yours. It's only happened on mine. So once I'm gone, it shouldn't happen anywhere else. But if that's happening, it's not you, it's me. Letting you know, just like I did that little fun dance, we're recording. So that was recorded. We are recording, so you can catch up on this series or even past ones from season 1 and season 2 on the BPL YouTube page. We have an entire National Parks playlist. So you can, I think the best way to find it, honestly, is to Google BPL YouTube National Parks, and it will pop up right there. If you do not enjoy the captions that are right now coming up at the bottom of your screen, you can hide them. You'll click on the little bubble, and a menu will appear. You can click on Hide Subtitles, and those will go away for you. And you'll notice that there is a chat form as well. If you have questions, feel free. Click on the little chat bubble, type in your questions. Please notice the to form, because if it's going to everyone, it's going to go to everyone. If it's going to hosted panelists, it will just go to the people you see on the screen, meaning me and the wonderful Ranger Jen and the wonderful Sean. So those are the people who will see it. So make sure you notice who you're sending your question to. All questions will be held mainly to the end, just so we don't interrupt the flow of our presentation. But our wonderful moderator, Sean, will be keeping track of them, and he'll come at the end of the screen, ask those questions for you. All right, I'm doing it again, I'm babbling. So without further ado, please welcome Ranger Jennifer as she presents environmental and climate justice in Beacon Hill. Woo!
Good evening, and thank you, Karen. So I'm going to get us started by sharing my screen. And feel free to use the chat to let me know if you're having a hard time hearing me. Someone can relay that message. So welcome. As I said, good evening. My name is Jennifer Steele. I'm an education technician for the National Parks of Boston, more specifically Boston African American National Historic Site. And this evening, I'm going to be focusing on environmental and climate justice in Beacon Hill. So I'm going to get us started by reviewing an explanation of why exactly I chose this picture here to the left. So you can see the beacon statue on top of a hill that kind of brings us exactly to the place that I'm going to be discussing. This may be a familiar statue to some of you, and this may be a familiar story, but the beacon statue is exactly how the neighborhood got its name, going back to 1635, when a beacon, a wooden pole, was put on top of a hill, really to warn townspeople of danger. It was the highest point in the city at that point in the town. So really making sure that people were understanding when there was danger, when there was a call for action, so that way they could see it using the beacon. The beacon in and of itself gives the name Beacon Hill that name because it was on top of the hill. But I'm kind of going a little bit too far ahead. So I actually want to jump a little bit backwards because I'm going to be discussing this premier neighborhood, this well-established neighborhood. Beacon Hill really in and of itself has this name that holds a lot of power. When someone, references the neighborhood, pretty much right away, thoughts are understood about the place. It's well known beyond Boston limits. But I'm going here to talk about the Shawmut Peninsula, before Boston proper was established. So Shawmut Peninsula, this again might be a familiar phrase to you, the establishment of Boston on the Shawmut Peninsula in the before the colonial period. So prior to colonial settlement, the land of Boston resided on what was known as the Shawmut Peninsula, and that translated to living waters in the Algonquin language. The native people who lived here were referencing the title changes that would have occurred, allowing for them to have seasonal communities for fishing, hunting, and activities during the warmer months and moving elsewhere during the colder months that Boston held. I should not say Boston, I should say the Shawmut Peninsula at this point. But they were using mudflats, salt marshes that made up a large majority of the quote unquote land, again, paying a tribute to the living waters aspect. And they were, again, using that for their seasonal communities. But in 1630, there was a land transfer with the Sachem. So the Puritan settlers established officially their Massachusetts Bay Colony. I'm kind of skipping ahead here. I'm not really going to be able to get to every aspect of land reformations over time. I encourage you all to do a lot of research on your own like I did. I learned a lot, and also the best part of it is going to see these places. So I think the best part is having aspects that are still here that help us to understand the land that we currently reside on. Because it doesn't look like this. Maps that over time that I'm going to show you that you'll look at of Boston don't look like this. But when I'm discussing the Shawmut Peninsula, hopefully we're on the same page about what that means. Skipping ahead to 1630, we're discussing the Tri-Mount area. So here, this image is a lot later, from 1830s, but this was really to pay tribute to the acknowledgement of what this land terrain would have looked like, very mountainous prior to the raising that I'm going to discuss. And maybe you're with me on the same page that Boston has changed over time. It's a lot more flat than it once was. So you can see the artists, there's two, tried to depict the native people using the land here on the shore. And then you can also see these three peaks, so three mountains. So the Tri-Mount that made up Boston, these three mountains were one, Copp's Hill, which you could see in reference in the north end. Still today there's Copp's Hill and Copp's Hill Burying Ground. Then we had Fort Hill in the financial district, and then moving on to Tri-Mountain, Beacon Hill. So I'm going to zero in on this one in particular. So just acknowledging there are three mountains, and in and of itself, Tri-Mountain had three peaks. I'm going to get to that a little bit later. But bordering Beacon Hill's south slope today, Puritan settlers established Boston Common in 1634, and it currently holds the title of the nation's oldest public park. So Beacon Hill residents have had access to an abundance of open green space for generations. Familiar in the background, you could see the Hancock Mansion. So the Hancock Mansion belonged to Thomas Hancock, John Hancock's uncle. It was on Beacon Hill, one of the first homes on Beacon Hill. In 1737, it was built. And again, you can see Boston Common, this great view that residents along what is now Beacon Street would have of Boston Common, and still do today some. This home, the Hancock Mansion, it was raided by British soldiers in 1775 and was used at a time for wounded soldiers. So the raising of the hills. And I just want to point out, I guess I forgot to point out the beacon to the right of the Hancock Mansion. So it was there at times, but oftentimes not used. So not used for the purpose it held, but still used in the sense that it gave the name and it gave the place purpose. So raising the hills. So raising the Tri-Mountain Peak did allow for the State House, as well as the expansion of the State House over time. It was a Charles Bulfinch design. So this hill in particular, Beacon Hill, really has the name Beacon Hill because of its three mountains. So the three being Cotton Hill, or once Pemberton, Century Hill, and I'm sorry, I do have to say Mount Hordem. Mount Hordem giving it its name. We'll talk about that because of the promiscuous activities occurring there. But early settlers would have referenced maybe this entire region as Century Hill, and historians now today refer to it as Tri-Mount for these three significant hills. And then we could also be able to understand that this has a significant amount of impact because of Tremont Street. So over time, maybe being pronounced in different ways, Tri-Mountain, you could call it Tri-Mountain, but in turn, really acknowledging the three peaks. I'm going to get into these three peaks and how really they changed the land and the use of the land over time. But I think some of these images allow us to be able to understand when we go up Beacon Hill today, we might not really understand what exactly that would have felt like for individuals a long time ago when it was much steeper. So I'm just going to start with the North Slope. So the North Slope referring to the part of the neighborhood alongside Cambridge Street, more downhill streets. This neighborhood was being used as a free Black community in the late 18th century. So even before a lot of the Boston Brahmins moved into the neighborhood, free Blacks were establishing homes in Beacon Hill on the North Slope, more specifically. But in addition to the free Black community that was there, Eastern European immigrants were able to use Beacon Hill as a home to allow them to provide for their families, seek jobs and opportunities in the city. So we have a multi-ethnic and multiracial neighborhood. Like I said, Eastern European immigration from in the 18th and 19th century from places like Lithuania. We had Russian Jews, and many of them had cultural impacts on this community, which is super great because you can also see those today with some existent places like the Vilna Shell, as well as the African Meeting House, the Abiel Smith School. These are triumphant opportunities for these individuals to allow for advanced opportunities for minority groups, like I said, Eastern European immigrants and the free Black community. And again, I'm not going to be able to talk about all of the advancements of these groups. So like I said, just do some research on your own, but know how much they impacted the layout of this community. So here you can see to the right, this tenement building referred to as the Goldfarb tenement building. And so this was built in 1910, kind of skipping ahead since there would have been tenement buildings prior to this one and many others. But over time, those would be expanded. So building even bigger tenement buildings to allow for more housing and more units. And I just wanted to discuss really why a majority of people, minorities, would be established in this neighborhood. And it is unfortunate, just going back to the reference to Mount Hordem and the promiscuous activities occurring there, the impact of this land on the people, although it gave them an opportunity to have a space of their own, it did also have a lot of challenges for both the free Black community and Eastern European immigrants in this neighborhood. So it was Massachusetts was the first to adopt slavery in 1683, but it was also the first to abolish it in 1781. And this granted a lot of social impact for Boston's free Black population, as well as Eastern European immigrants who were living in this neighborhood. So I'm skipping to the South Slope. So when I talk about the South Slope, I just wanted to mention the Mount Vernon proprietors. So they were real estate developers. There was really four individuals who were investing in land in Beacon Hill over time that allowed the expansion of this neighborhood to be beyond even what these people imagined. So they purchased the land of John Singleton Copley. That might be a familiar name to those of you who have visited the Museum of Fine Arts. So he had gone off to England, and they purchased his pasture, and really in turn splitting that up into lots, building row houses, brick buildings that you even might see today, and really allowing for this space to be built up as the neighborhood had not been prior because of the rough terrain. And just acknowledging the paradox between the North Slope and the South Slope. So a lot of these homes that were developed on Mount Vernon, Chestnut, and Walnut, and many others allowed for many individuals of wealth, more affluent, as they may be referenced to Boston Brahmins, to accelerate in these neighborhoods, despite the North Slope seeing struggles due to the undesirable impacts of living on the North Slope. So they had row houses. I'm sorry, I did not mean to say row houses. They had rope walks and other industry that really impacted the people living in that space. But here on the South Slope, individuals were able to prosper and continue to participate in society. So like the Mount Vernon proprietors, these individuals who not only did they already have wealth, but continued to profit off of their ability to sell off this land and build homes for more affluent neighbors. And this property was created by the raising of Mount Vernon, which is more on the western side of Beacon Hill. So I'm going to get into the flat, the difference between the neighborhood that was more on existing land, but just knowing that this was raised completely, or not, I should not say completely, but raised quite a bit. So what you see today is not at all the terrain that would have existed prior to the raising of Mount Vernon. And I just wanted to make sure to talk about or show you one of the pictures, houses that you could see today. So the Cabot, 65 Mount Vernon Street, was home to the Cabots and Lodges of Lowell. They had multiple units on this street, but this is just one example of a home that is still existent today. It was an example of, again, this Boston Brahmin Federalist style home. So I'm just going to focus in on one of the individuals who was part of the Mount Vernon proprietors, and I purposely chose Hephzibah Swan Clark because she is known to be the only female participant in that group. So she was able to use her fortune, she was an heiress, to buy homes or land on Beacon Hill as part of the Mount Vernon proprietors. She's also known to have gone on to buy homes for her daughters, so purposely buying homes for her 3 daughters or land and then building the homes. She was able to establish something for them when she passed on, or being able to support her daughters. So the daughters' houses are on Chestnut Street, or were on Chestnut Street, with hers as well, the house that she resided in. So I'm just moving on now to the flat. So when I was mentioning some of the more rough terrain like Mount Vernon Street, places like that we refer to as the hill. And it's pretty easy to understand why when you're walking uphill. That would definitely make you understand the hill aspect compared to the flat when you're on Charles Street and along the Charles River Esplanade. So I'm just going to talk about the extended shoreline. And then you could see, if you're checking out this image here, we have the embankment and the embankment. So I'm going to get into how it has been changed over time, the Esplanade, but originally the embankment, it was established in 1910, and which allowed a lot of access to open green space and water. These are what I would like to refer to as cooling zones, a place where you could maybe go under a tree, and really at little cost to the individual, being able to have a place to enjoy the environment and open green space. So great for these individuals in this neighborhood to be able to have an opportunity to seek open green space or a cooling zone. But just something that I kind of noticed when I was attending over here, just something that would be a barrier is Starro Drive. So for neighbors, this might be very well known, the options to get over to the Charles River Esplanade, which, by the way, totally worth it, but not really feasible if you are in a wheelchair, are a person with disabilities, or not really as able to cross different types of pathways. So one of the pathways I'm thinking about in particular, it's pretty steep. So being able, having to cross over traffic might be a barrier for some individuals, not being able to access these cooling zones. I just wanted to acknowledge the fact that Mill Cove was filled in to create Charles Street, the Charles Street area, rather, this part of the Esplanade and the public gardens and Back Bay. Okay. So I'm moving on to Cotton Hill, or Pemberton Hill, which was originally named after John Cotton, who was the grandfather of Cotton Mather. He was one of the original Puritan settlers in Boston proper, and Cotton Hill was then renamed to Pemberton Hill. And this hill, I could see this view from 1816. This hill was raised, and it really only took 5 months. I think it's pretty interesting to think about them being able to do that quickly, and a significant amount of feet, raising it over 80 feet in total. So the hill was cut down in 5 months, and it was used to reclaim the North Cove area, and really allowed for the Pemberton Square area to be laid out in 1835. And so this is a part of the community that is not existent today. So what residents would see here, again, brick row houses, they're kind of everywhere, streets, narrow streets, brick and gaslit. And also you can see the horse and carriage, which I just would acknowledge that option for transportation, or really limited options for transportation given the narrow street layout. But Pemberton, it was laid out in 1835 and eventually expanded to the Central Square Plaza, which we can see today, but which is exactly why this small square, so this one bit of green space that Beacon Hill would have, is no longer in existence. But something that I find pretty interesting is the aspects that we can see today. So the Suffolk County Courthouse, or now known as the John Adams Courthouse, off to the left there, in addition to the Central Square Plaza crescent shape. So Pemberton today, this is what really what you get. So we have a courthouse here today, prior to an affluent neighborhood filled with residents using these homes as vacation homes. But now we can see that is no longer in existence. Something that is unique, though, is the shape of that crescent, really because it comes somewhat before these homes were removed. So really over time, as the homes were removed, this entire space was built up to be what we see today, Central Square Plaza. And also just an acknowledgement, the Scully Square is no longer in existence. Scully Square is sort of where Government Center currently resides. That would have been a somewhat of a downtown area for shops, business, commerce, and for people to meet and socialize. And all of that is not really existent today, just acknowledging the amount of infrastructure. So I see some bushes, but lack of green. And Pemberton Square, again, had that small garden, wasn't much, but to be able to have some tree canopy and access to green space in Beacon Hill, and that is no longer in existence. But what are these public green spaces? So we have 1634, the nation's oldest public park. 1839 Boston Public Garden, and 1910 the Charles River Esplanade, the embankment. And just acknowledging that Boston Common does sit on dry land, so original ground of the Shawmut Peninsula, but Boston Public Garden is not. So that was somewhat of landfill. It is a dry, a more wet area, and we'll talk about that later when we discuss how that affects current day climate impacts. I'd just like to point out that Boston Common, not only for residents, but for visitors annually, millions of people get to experience the joys of this park over time. So over 300 years of that history, it's pretty incredible, but it does not look the same as it always was, sometimes losing that tree canopy. Although there is some today, you could consider Boston Common a cooling zone, and as well as the Boston Public Garden and the Charles River Esplanade. Just moving on to some urban development. So transportation, could see an old image here of the Beacon Hill portal to the underground, above ground railway. So this portal, railway allowed for people to be able to kind of reach different parts of the city beyond accessible means of walking and biking. Although it's not here today, you could tell how this might have impacted residents being able to have that option for transportation, but also impacting infrastructure. Having a portal right next to your home, and like this one, I'm sure residents in Boston are aware of the necessity to have tunnels like this one, but just acknowledging the fact that it's right in the middle of their neighborhood, and that has also changed. So over time, you'd see things like the railway, so streetcars coming in through Beacon Hill, or taking residents of Boston and Beacon Hill over to places like Cambridge and Somerville. So streetcars for the Middlesex Railroad to Charlestown allowed for that. And really the Charles Street station or square that is still somewhat existent today. It's Charles MGH, but allowed for streetcars to be able to turn around and continue their journey. And residents also would have had access to the West Boston Bridge, or now today, the Longfellow Bridge. So water access. So this was new to me, the Beacon Hill Reservoir, not here today. This would be the west wing of the State House, but access to potable water in the 19th century for Beacon Hill residents, it was pretty convenient. However, over time, this was not used as much when the Roxbury Reservoir came into play in the 1870s, or by 1889, the reservoir was removed and the expansion of the State House took place. And just going on the other aspects of water access, the Charles River and the Boston Common Frog Pond, which Frog Pond is a great opportunity to have recreation during the summer months and the winter. But the Frog Pond, before the Frog Pond, there would have been water holes, small splash zones, or bathing houses in Boston Common for public access. So open spaces. I purposely did not say green spaces because if you look at some of these spaces, they may lack some green. But to acknowledge these places where people may be able to openly congregate, we have Lewisburg Square, but that is privately owned. So residents of Lewisburg Square are able to access this small green space. Boston Common, this is a public park for all residents to be able to attend, just acknowledging the fact that for some residents, this may be quite a trek, and it also might be uphill, and depending on different abilities, that might not be as much of an option to seek a cooling zone. And then I just would acknowledge the playgrounds for some environmental solace. People may enjoy places like the Myrtle, Phillips, or Temple Street parks. But again, these places having brick or built spaces, they may lack some green, but they are accessible outdoor spaces for this neighborhood. So I'm moving along to the social impacts or the human impacts on this neighborhood. And I might be skipping ahead quite a bit, but I'm just going to talk about an event, the Battle of the Bricks. In April 1947, the ladies of Beacon Hill congregated because they were seeking to protect their neighborhood or protect the bricks of their neighborhood. And you can see that here, these upturned bricks on the sidewalk. So a bulldozer came through their neighborhood here on West Cedar Street. The women took to action by sitting on top of the bricks, sitting on blankets on top of the bricks in order to make sure that theft would not occur and their bricks would be able to be relaid and preserved for years to come. So that happened in 1947, but I would acknowledge the efforts made by individuals or groups over years, many years. So one organization that it really is exemplar citizen association would be the Beacon Hill Civic Association, which is established in 1922. To advocate for neighborhood input in decision making and other various aspects to protect their neighborhood. So the group has volunteers who form community, really. They are taking on responsibilities to maintain order in their neighborhood by acknowledging community needs throughout the year. This is established by Marion Nichols. She was the founder of the Beacon Hill Civic Association. She's known to be the daughter of one of the daughters of the Nichols family. And so their home was on Mount Vernon Street. Now it is a public museum. And she was also an activist for women's reform. So we've made it. Beacon Hill today. It is accessible, really, because it is the place in the heart of Boston that is very attractive to places, to people. I guess you could say maybe other neighborhoods have their beauty and lore as well. But Beacon Hill possesses so much historic value that it is still going to be an opportunity for people to learn about the different types of histories, social opportunities for various groups over years and to come, hopefully. And I was just acknowledging also the access to different types of civic opportunities. So being able to participate in politics, social organizations. The Beacon Hill is home to the Women's Era Club and other literary clubs. So opportunities to have for people in Beacon Hill have always been limitless. But that doesn't mean this neighborhood hasn't had their own struggles. So there is access to water and other vital necessities, but as we've mentioned, the water in the Charles River Esplanade, which is a major water source to the left of that neighborhood, it is inaccessible for some people. So I just have this picture here that I think goes well with some of the things I'm about to talk about, just acknowledging the fact that some of these streets are not as ADA compliant as they could be. So the Beacon Hill Historic District architectural guidelines and the City of Boston Zoning Board of Appeal prevent redevelopment and visible changes from occurring without approval. So these laws may impact the access to public sites. So not if you're a person in a wheelchair, not being able to use these sidewalks may impact your ability to get to public sites. Ensuring safe passage and roads or sidewalks to meet ADA compliance. Historic building preservation, certain aspects or things that you could do to your home or could not, or business. and really also impacts the road and sidewalk signage in the area. So that actually isn't it. I just want to do one more thing, which would involve my sharing my screen, which would just be to talk about who does this impact. So it might not impact me as much as a temporary visitor, but for those who are living there, these different types of climate impacts may change people's ability to live or reside in this neighborhood over time. So I'm going to check out the Climate Ready Boston map. It's a great resource that the city of Boston has provided to be able to check out not only the Beacon Hill neighborhood, but neighborhoods across Boston, and how maybe different climate or social impacts really alter the use of this land. So I've kind of skipped ahead, and I definitely will share the link to the Climate Ready Boston map. Super accessible, so if you type that in, you should find it. But I've already kind of zoomed in here to Beacon Hill area, so easiest way to tell is Boston Common. And it seems like they have already put some filters on, and I could take some of those off. So just starting right here with daytime air quality, because I want to talk more first about the water aspects, and you'll already be able to see some stormwater flooding here. You can see the different layers that I'm using, and you can use as well. So looking at this area, being able to tell what different types of climate change impacts might occur over time and how that might change the land that has been built up. Crazy to think that this land has been added on to over time, and it may be subtracted with the amount of coastal flooding or different types of storm water flooding that Boston sees, or this neighborhood sees. So we might not see as much coastal flooding because we're not on the coast here, but we will see rainwater being flooding out different aspects of lower neighborhoods or streets. So it is also using annual coastal risk, annual rainwater, different percentages over time, or also the years. So doing it more closer, if you did just the 2050s as opposed to the 2070s, you would be able to see something that could occur in our lifetime, some flooding in the neighborhoods that people reside in Beacon Hill, or the Flat, as we've spoken about. And so in 2050 is not seeming like it's too crazy, although just also acknowledging that rainwater does expand the pond in the public garden, and mentioning earlier that is not sitting on some pre-existing land, so that would just be completely flooded. Some of the pathways in there wouldn't necessarily cause as much harm, but over time it really could. So if we look at something a little bit later, like the 2070s, there we have things right in the middle of streets. And I didn't mean to say things, I meant to say some puddles, some water, some flooding occurring right here within Beacon Hill. And then I would just also acknowledge the different layers. First, I wanted to talk about heat. Because this neighborhood, lacking tree canopy, will experience some heat vulnerability that may impact different groups of people. So here you can see the different types of groups that might be impacted due to some social vulnerability. So elderly folks, we can put that layer on here to see where exactly the social vulnerability for elderly folks in Boston might be impacted. So immediately I saw that the entirety of Beacon Hill kind of lit up there, as well as expanding to Back Bay and up to the north end, which is interesting. Gives you a little bit of insight as to who is living where, and how maybe over time the different climate impacts might affect them, but doesn't actually necessarily give you the full demographics. For that, you would really need to do your research. Not only are there other maps about demographics, there's also just the statistics about who's living where. And so we do know that there is a good amount of elderly individuals living in Beacon Hill. And so that just could tell you a lot about their different types of social vulnerability, especially given the terrain there, and access to different types of cooling zones. And so I like to think about cooling zones not only public green spaces or open spaces, but also as places that really you could get cool in case of an emergency. When the summer hits, summer heat, over years, we will experience hotter summers. And so making sure that residents have access to different types of cooling zones, like grocery stores, libraries, and even a neighbor's home. And that is the best part about different civic associations, to be able to support one another. So hopefully residents are able to do that for elderly and for folks who need it. But you could use this map to be able to tell the different aspects of who's living where, and what actually these weather impacts are going to do over time. So I'm not going to go into all of them because there's a good amount of different layers. You could see all the types of places you could look, and obviously I'm focusing here on Beacon Hill, but you might want to check out somewhere over here, like the coast, the harbor. It's also a great discussion that our park will have upcoming. But I am actually going to leave you all here with this and just acknowledge the fact that this might be able to tell you over time and into the future who and how this place is going to be altered. But know that we are the temporary residents or inhabitants of this space. And hopefully visitors and habitants for years to come are able to treat this place as their home and protect and preserve it as others have before them. I am done sharing my portion for this evening, but I just want to say one more thing. I'm just being thank you to the Boston Public Library, the National Parks of Boston staff who have helped me along the way, and for all of you joining tonight. So I think I'm going to pass it to Sean now.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jen, for sharing that informative presentation. I did have a couple questions in the chat. Also some links from Karen with BPL resources related to what Jen has been talking about. So definitely feel free to check those out. But I do want to share questions. So far we have two. So the first one is, can you suggest some good resources to start with for learning more?
Yeah, I feel like that might depend on the subject, since I feel like I might have spoke about a lot tonight. So I would start if you're looking for current day climate impacts with this map here. And really the city of Boston has laid out, so you'll see not only the map, but some data, some examples of how they might be seeking change to address different types of climate impacts over time. So coastal flooding plans, stormwater, extreme heat, and also looking at the people who this might impact and how we be helpful. Now, that might not answer all your questions about content. And so for that, I would say I did have to look through a lot of different avenues. I can't say I can recommend a book. For that, I felt like there wasn't as much. I guess I'm looking for a good read, and I can't say I was picking them up. But I definitely recommend using the Boston Public Library. Their online collection is great, but also actually visiting. So that was one of the more fun parts of my research, to be able to use the Boston Public Library. And so it's cool that I'm collaborating with them. So using different types of organizations like the Massachusetts Historical Society and doing research locally is always a fun opportunity to get out there.
Awesome. Yeah, sometimes with these things, it's really kind of piecemeal and pulling, some stories from other sources that maybe don't completely dive into the topic you're doing. It's the definitely the fun and sometimes challenging work of a historian.
Oh, yeah.
So another question we have was about, and I don't know if, again, kind of based on the sources you have, if you specifically have an answer to this, but did you come across in your research any record of people who were actually opposed to the raising of the hills, the rising of the hills, like anyone who did not want people to be kind of, flattening that land a little bit more?
Wow, I actually love that question. But I can't say I've found that throughout my research. That's something that I would encourage folks to look into, because I feel like I just scratched the surface on that topic, how the hills were raised, really the company behind it, the Boston Mill Corporation, going in there and being able to then, once they raised it and flattened out the land, sell off those lots. Their hope was to create mills, which was not as successful, but we know today that it was successful to be able to use that previously uninhabited land or unusable. So I think there was a good amount of support, given that it had a lot of profit behind it, but that would be something I need to do more research on. A great question.
Great. So have another question that just came in, actually. And I think this will, based on timing here, this will probably be our last one before we turn it over to Karen. But so the question is, what drove the transition of the North Slope demographic from the tenements in the 1800s / early 1900s to the present? Which I know is definitely it can be a long answer, but in some of the research that you did, what drove that transition of the North Slope demographic?
Yeah, good. I'm glad you asked. Might have been something I skipped out. My apologies. But different types of social events over time would have occurred that really impacted people. So one being the Civil War in the 19th century. That was a huge deterrent for people to be able to seek other opportunities elsewhere, more places like Roxbury and Dorchester. And as another pivotal event would be the Great Depression. So you'd have influxes of people choosing to depart at those times, and maybe either potentially even for other reasons and elsewhere. But those were two things that came up in my research that I could totally understand why significant events like those two would maybe provide an opportunity for people to move elsewhere.
Awesome. So thank you again so much, Jen. Thank you for all the questions in the chat, and I will turn it back over to Karen to close this out.
Thank you, Sean.
All righty, I'm back. Ranger Jen, you're magical. You're magical. I've learned many things. I'm also like deep into the North Slope now. I'm like, what is this? I've never heard of this. And this is also why I absolutely love all of your presentations, because I go down some pretty weird rabbit holes afterwards and ignore the rest of my job. Totally fine. Anyway, thank you. That was absolutely wonderful. And thank you everyone for joining us today. We really appreciate it. We know it's cold. Actually, it's not that cold, to be honest, for January. But it's dark. Dark is gross. And come back in 2 weeks when the next presentation, I believe, is the transatlantic life of Peter Faneuil. Transatlantic, what do I have? The transatlantic world of Peter Faneuil, which honestly I'm fascinated by. So I can't wait. Hope to see everyone there. Thank you again. Have a good day.